During a packed meeting at a Houston law firm, the boss smirked the moment Anika Thompson finished speaking. "With that accent, I thought I was ordering lunch in the Deep South," he said, half joke, full insult. The room went silent. Anika said nothing. She didn't push back. She just lowered her head and kept taking notes. No one knew that a few days later, the same man would stumble over her resume, and everything he thought he knew about her. From mock to unforgettable, Anika would soon become the reason the whole office had to confront what it chose to overlook. What happened after that offhand comment? Stay with us until the end to discover the truth behind a voice they tried to dismiss. Anika Thompson, 30, worked as a contract attorney at Heston and Wainer, a mid-sized law firm based in Houston. She had grown up in Jackson, Mississippi, and brought with her a gentle Southern accent, soft, steady, unmistakable. She was the only black attorney on the in-house compliance team. Always early, always prepared, always professional. She kept to herself, spoke with care, and never interrupted. Colleagues described her as overly polite, reserved, yet quietly handed her their most complicated legal documents when something needed to be reviewed with precision. Her direct manager, David Lenning, was a man who wore his Ivy League credentials like armor. He was sharp, cold, and known for dismissing anyone who hadn't taken the same path. His tone with Anika was clipped, condescending. Not overt, but constant. In a workplace driven by status and subtle power plays, Anika took a different approach. She stayed in her lane, but she moved fast. She double-checked every footnote, rewrote flawed clauses, and caught risks no one else did. Still, when it came to recognition, she was skipped. In meetings, her proposals were nodded at, then repeated by others with louder voices. She never pushed to reclaim credit. One time, she stayed up all night reworking a compliance model, only to watch another associate present it the next morning, with her name left out. She didn't object. She just returned to her desk, opened a new case file, and kept going. She didn't want applause. She just wanted to matter. She believed good work would speak for itself. What she hadn't expected was how long people would pretend not to hear it. The first signs weren't loud, but they were deliberate. In a Tuesday morning meeting, Anika raised a concern about a contract clause that could expose the firm to liability. Before she could finish, David cut her off. "Just stay focused on reviewing the language," he said, not even looking up. A week later, a male colleague repeated her exact point in a separate meeting. David called it sharp thinking. Anika said nothing. Then came the meeting minutes. Though she hadn't been assigned the task, David asked her to write them. "You're detail-oriented," he said flatly. Normally, that role rotated among junior staff. She was not junior. She was being sidelined. During a lunch break, David cracked a joke to the group about Southerners dragging out vowels like bedtime stories. The room gave a nervous laugh. Anika sat still. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. When she was asked to review a high-profile contract with an international partner, she spent 3 nights perfecting the red lines. But when the document was finalized, her name was missing from the legal sign-off. Only David's initials were there. A colleague stopped by her desk. Whispered. "He said your accent might make the client uneasy." That same week, a critical strategy meeting was scheduled with one of their biggest clients. Anika wasn't invited. She asked David why. He said, without looking up from his phone, "Maybe next time. If it makes sense." The tone was casual. The message wasn't. She started seeing the pattern. It wasn't that she was invisible. She was being intentionally left out. Carefully moved to the edge of the room. Casually mocked in ways people could laugh off, then forget. But Anika didn't forget. She began to understand something deeper. This wasn't about performance. This was about perception. And someone had already decided where she belonged. Anika had stayed quiet long enough. After being interrupted yet again during a team meeting, she decided to say something, not publicly, not emotionally, just professionally. That evening, she wrote a short email to David. She pointed out how she'd been repeatedly excluded from key meetings, how her input was often disregarded, and how the team dynamic had become quietly unequal. She didn't accuse. She reflected. She hoped, maybe, it would spark something useful. David's reply came within the hour. It was short. "I'll consider your points, if you're willing to adjust expectations to match your current role." The words didn't shock her. But they landed hard. The following Monday, during their weekly roundtable, David called on her, twice, not for insights, but for irrelevant hypotheticals. Then he leaned back and said, "Maybe it's the Southern cadence, but I'm struggling to follow your point." Scattered laughter filled the room. The kind that people do when they don't want to seem uncomfortable. No one looked her in the eye. Later that day, she was informed, without context, that she'd been removed from the drafting team for an upcoming high-value contract. The same one she had been preparing materials for all month. When she asked for clarity, she was told, priorities shifted. That afternoon, a colleague, one of the few she trusted, stopped by her desk. Quiet voice. Serious face. "I think you should know, David's been saying you're overly sensitive. Not a team fit. That you're creating tension." By week's end, the new task list came out. Anika's name had been moved. No more client-facing work. No more strategic briefs. Just routine contract reviews and policy maintenance. No one told her why. But they didn't need to. She understood. All it took was one email. One request to be seen. And they responded by trying to make her disappear. Not suddenly. Not loudly. Just enough to remind her where they thought she belonged. Despite everything, Anika applied. The firm had opened up an internal posting for Director of Legal Affairs, a step above her current role, one that would involve leading teams, negotiating policy, shaping internal protocol. She knew her chances were slim. She wasn't the obvious choice. But she wasn't invisible either. At least, she refused to be. When David saw her name on the applicant list, he let out a quiet chuckle. "Well," he muttered in passing, "interesting that she's giving it a shot." That afternoon, in a closed-door conversation with another senior manager, he said something else. "She's bright, sure. But that voice? Sounds like someone reading law books on her grandmother's porch." A junior assistant overheard it. The comment wasn't meant to spread. But it did. By the end of the week, half the floor had heard it. No one repeated it to Anika. No one said anything out loud. But the energy shifted. People made space in the elevator. Smiled too tightly. Conversations paused when she walked by. The following Monday, David was asked to review the candidate resumes. He skimmed through the stack, until he reached hers. And then he stopped. Columbia Law School. Full scholarship. Clerked under a federal judge. Contributed to a joint task force on civil rights policy at the UN. Published. Cited. Clean. Precise. He blinked. Reread the name. Check the page again. It didn't match the image he'd built in his head. The accent, the quiet posture, the way she didn't force herself into the room. He had assumed she came from a small local program. He had never asked. Now, he knew. Later that day, David sat alone at his desk, resume still in hand. He didn't make a joke. He didn't brush it off. And when the short list for interviews was sent around, he added her name. No fanfare. No apology. Just a silent checkmark next to her file. He even spoke up in the meeting. "I think we should hear what Anika has to say," he said. "Her background is worth consideration." It wasn't kindness. It wasn't guilt. It was recognition, sudden, uncomfortable, and real. For the first time, David didn't see the accent. He saw the woman behind it. Anika made it to the final interview round. But she didn't get the job. The official feedback was simple: lack of senior leadership experience. A polite excuse. A quiet dismissal. She nodded when they told her. She smiled. She thanked them. And then she moved on. What no one knew was that someone else had been paying attention. A representative from an international nonprofit, one that had partnered with the firm on a pro bono project, had reviewed her application file. The same file David had once overlooked. A month later, Anika received a call. An opening had come up, legal advisor for a human rights initiative based in Geneva. They wanted someone with international experience, a strong research background, and a voice that understood the power of quiet resilience. She accepted. There was no farewell party. No LinkedIn announcement. No dramatic goodbye email to the firm. She simply cleared her desk on a rainy Friday afternoon. Left her access card at reception. Nodded once to the security guard. And walked out of the building. Not fast. Not triumphant. Just steady. But the way she walked, straight-backed, unshaken, stayed in the minds of those who had watched her shrink into silence for too long. The following week, during a routine Monday team meeting, David paused mid-sentence. Almost casually, he said, "She was better than I gave her credit for." That was all he said. But it was more than he'd ever said before. Later, in the break room, a junior associate whispered, "She didn't need to shout to be heard. She just needed someone to stop pretending she wasn't there." From that point on, something shifted. People still talked. Still judged. But they spoke more carefully. No more jokes about accents. No more harmless comments in passing. There was a silence now. A silence that carried weight. Because everyone remembered how she left. And what it finally took for someone to see her. 1 year later, her name surfaced again. Anika's interview was published in a global legal journal under the headline, "They Mocked My Voice. Now I use it to speak at the United Nations." The article made its rounds fast, first through international law circles, then across LinkedIn feeds, and finally back to Houston. At her old firm, a few associates read it in silence. No one forwarded it. But everyone read it. The words weren't angry. They were precise. Poised. "Your voice doesn't have to rise to be powerful," she had said. "It just has to be your own." The article triggered something. At Heston and Wainer, the HR department launched a quiet review of their internal policies, how they hired, how they promoted, how feedback was given. Anonymous evaluations became standard. Accent bias training was added to onboarding. For the first time, cultural fluency was treated as a strength, not a side note. Then came the internal mentorship program. It was designed for minority staff. They called it Voice Matters. People noticed. Someone suggested inviting Anika to speak at the launch event. The idea made it up to David. He sent the email himself. She declined. "I appreciate the invitation," she replied. "But I'm focused on the work ahead. I don't need to revisit the past. I'm busy writing what comes next." No bitterness. Just clarity. Weeks later, a handwritten note arrived at her new office. No name on the envelope. The message inside was short. "I'm sorry for laughing. And thank you for not laughing back." At year-end, the firm held its annual recognition event. Speeches were made. Slideshows played. Names were honored. One seat at the front of the auditorium remained empty. No one mentioned it. But no one filled it either. It sat there, still, quiet, and full of memory. Because sometimes, the most powerful presence is the one that doesn't need to return to be felt. Anika Thompson didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice to demand fairness. She walked forward with quiet resolve, held onto her identity, and let the truth rise on its own. This story was never just about a mocked accent. It was about a workplace conditioned to judge people by surface details, by voice, by background, by assumptions. And about one woman who proved that what they tried to make small was, in fact, her strength. Anika didn't seek revenge. She didn't wait to be chosen. She chose herself. And that is a kind of victory no one can take away. If you've ever been dismissed for being different, don't shrink to fit someone else's comfort. Let the value of who you are speak louder than the noise. If you believe fairness begins with respecting what makes us unique, share this video. Like, leave a comment, and subscribe to Black Excellence so you don't miss stories that challenge, inspire, and restore. Thank you for watching until the end. We'll see you in the next video.